New videos every day.
Okay, so I'm John Breeding. It's Monday, May 19th in Austin, Texas on a beautiful day. That's my friend Leonard Roy Frank, Esquire, famous philosopher, activist, leader of the Psychiatry liberation movement, editor of the Random House Webster's Quotationary, the best all-around reference book for quotations in the world, as well as the Electoral Shock Quotationary, which is on our website at endofshock.com. I decided to share some quotations on the history of certain issues in psychiatry, and those are taken from the work of Leonard Frank, is why I mention him here today. Back in the early 90s, before he put out the Random House Webster's Quotationary and the Electoral Shock Quotationary, he put together a couple of little pieces for Dendron, which is a magazine that was put out by Support Coalition International before it became Mind Freedom, which you can now see at mindfreedom.org. But it had this great magazine called Dendron for a while, and Leonard put together this chronology of perspectives on madness, and I'm borrowing from that a little bit today. My favorite historian, Howard Zinn, is fond of the old saying that if you don't know history, it's as if you were born today. He talks about that in different contexts. For example, like if you don't know history, you think George Bush was the first president to ever lie about a war, and you're just shocked that presidents can lie about war. But if you know history, like Howard Zinn does, then you know that every president has lied in order to justify sending the country to war, Democrat or Republican. Bush, Johnson, Roosevelt, on down the line, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. The history of psychiatry is pretty interesting. I'm going to just share with you a few quotes to do this, and the first are just to make kind of the basic point of the situation here. And I'll start appropriately enough with the founding father of American psychiatry, modern psychiatry, whose face emblazons the seal of the American Psychiatric Association still, Benjamin Rush. One famous saying about Benjamin Rush is that the founding father of American psychiatry killed the founding father of our country. He was George Washington's treating physician, treating him by bloodletting, which was a causative factor in Washington's death. Here's a series of little quotes from Benjamin Rush back in the early 1800s. Miss H. was confined in our hospital in the year 1800 for several weeks. She displayed every mark of a sound mind except one. She hated her father. On a certain day, she acknowledged with pleasure a return of her filial attachment and affection for him. Soon after, she was discharged, cured. Each of these quotes says a lot about the perspective of psychiatric oppression. In this case, the treatment of the daughter being at the wishes of the father, who's oppressive, but it becomes a mental illness of the daughter to be angry at the father. And of course, the psychiatrist supports the powers that be, in this case, the father. Here's another one. A woman in our hospital was delivered many years ago of a fine child during her derangement, which was of a chronic and torpid nature. The affection which was suddenly awakened for this child removed her disease for several days. Wow. She was going through some drama around pregnancy and childbirth. She had that baby, connected with the baby, and she was beautiful. The child was taken from her breast lest it should contract the seeds of madness from her milk. It is biological and genetic after all, according to the psychiatrist. Her disease immediately returned. She is now and probably always will be an incurable tenant of our hospital. Wow, that's back in 1800. What do we have today? We have the Mothers Act in the U.S. Congress, which wants to screen pregnant mothers and new mothers for signs of mental illness related to these horrible things like so-called postpartum depression and things like that, which are considered mental illnesses. To be able to treat more of these mothers with psychiatric drugs, of course. Mothers act as an abomination as much as Benjamin Rush's treatment of that woman. Psychiatric drugs can only separate mothers from their ability to feel empathy and fully connect with their babies. Here's another one about the love mania. All marriages without a visible or probable means of subsistence are founded in madness. All premature attachments between the sexes which obstruct the pursuits of business are likewise the offspring of the love mania. Supporting production, supporting business, anything that gets in the way of that is mental illness. Still true. Ritalin's productivity drug. Antidepressants, so-called SSRIs, are productivity drugs. Anything that interferes with production is considered mental illness. Last one from Benjamin Rush. Definition of sanity. An aptitude to judge things like other men and regular habits, etc. Insanity, a departure from this. There you go. Psychiatry is a mechanism of social control and social order and enforcement of conformity. Very clear definition from over 200 years ago. But let's skip back to about the 3rd century A.D., almost 2,000 years ago. A guy named Anthony the Great, quoted in the sayings of the Desert Fathers. A time is coming when men will go mad, and when they see someone who is not mad, they will attack him, saying, "You are not mad, you are not like us." I think the time has well come. Wow. Here's one of my favorites from Samuel Cartwright, a doctor, physician, New Orleans Medical and Surgical Journal, 1850. Drapetomania is from the Greek word drapetes, a runaway slave, and mania, mad or crazy. It is unknown to our medical authorities, although its diagnostic symptom, the absconding from service, is well known to our planners and overseers as it was to the ancient Greeks. The cause, in most cases, that induces the Negro to run away from service is as much a disease of the mind as any other species of mental alienation, and much more curable as a general rule. So drapetomania, running away from service, meaning a runaway slave, is a mental illness. That was literally and true. And today it's very, at least metaphorically true, when you run away from work, when you run away from your family business, when you run away from school. It's judged as mental illness. That's the reality. How about this one from even before that, about 400 BC, from the famous Aristotle? There never was a genius without a touch of madness. Okay, that's Aristotle 2,500 years ago. Just acknowledging that genius involves some eccentricity, perhaps, right? But fast forward that to 1888, an Italian psychiatrist named Cesare Lombroso, in his book, The Man of Genius. Genius is a true degenerative psychosis belonging to the group of moral insanity. That's just one of many, many examples we could pull where some dynamic process is interpreted as mental illness by lesser men. Very famous psychiatrist in the 20th century, quoted in 1957 in the New York Times, William Menninger, largely responsible for the big growth of the mental health industry in the middle part of the last century. Mental health problems do not affect 3 out of 4, or do not affect 3 or 4 out of every 5, but 1 out of 1 people. So this trend of more and more mental illness is not really a new trend. It's just a lens of seeing everybody as mentally ill, meaning needing the purview and treatment of mental health professionals and psychiatrists. Life is challenging, folks. It's edgy. It's different. That's one way of seeing it. Another way is it's all suffering from mental illness. Last one on this little cycle. William Menninger's brother, Carl Menninger. He was notorious in some ways, but this was a good quote. I avoid using words like schizophrenia, just as I avoid using words like wop and nigger. Saturday Evening Post, 1964. At least in that quote, he was honest about the stigmatization and name-calling. That's really what it's about when you call somebody schizophrenic or ADHD or whatever. Okay, so this segues into the next part, which is a few more of these quotes that sort of just lay out the basic trend. Back around 250 years ago, Horace Mann, famous American educator, we go by the major vote, and if the majority are insane, the sane must go to the hospital. He's already seeing this thing coming down. It's insane society, you know. If the majority are insane, the sane must go to the hospital. John Stuart Mill, shortly after that. The man, and still more the woman, who can be accused either of doing what nobody does or of not doing what everybody does, is in peril of a commission de lunatico. In other words, conformity, enforce the social order. Psychiatry is a mechanism of social control. Get that over and over and over again. These guys were clear seers a couple 150 years ago, and that's what we're seeing now. Karl Kraus, the famous verbal artist. The psychiatrist unfailingly recognizes the madman by his excited behavior on being incarcerated. It's called resistance to treatment. It's called being non-compliant. And it's called being judged incompetent by the mental health courts because you don't agree with the opinion of your doctors. That's the pattern. There's another psychiatrist quoted by Albert Schweitzer, 1912. Everything we know about Jesus conforms so perfectly to the clinical picture of paranoia, it is hardly conceivable that we can even question the accuracy of the diagnosis. So there's this pattern of interpreting historical figures as mentally ill because they were allowed to be extreme and different than Jesus, Abraham Lincoln, you name it. It's such a grave insult. I'll give you a couple more here. For the 19th century, the initial model of madness would be to believe oneself to be God. See, then you would be crucified at the stake as a heretic. While for the preceding centuries, it had been to deny God. Deny God, you're a heretic, you were crucified or burned at the stake. Now it's called affirm God and think maybe that you're God and you're crazy. That's Michel Foucault. And here's Seymour Krim, another writer, but in this case a psychiatric survivor, so you're going to hear a different perspective. Insanity and psychosis can no longer be respected as meaningful definitions, but are used by limited individuals in positions of social power to describe ways of thinking that are alien, threatening, and obscure to them. So a lesser mind and or a controlling mind judges and condemns that which they don't understand or like. That's the pattern. It's very important to see that. Tom Zotz. In contemporary America, mental health has come to mean conformity to the demands of society. Mental illness is the refusal to play or the inability to play the game. Here's Zatz again. In vain does the alleged madman insist he is not sick. His inability to recognize his illness is regarded as a hallmark of his illness. In vain does he reject treatment. His refusal to submit is a further sign of his illness. Get that dynamic over and over again. Again, Zatz. The point is not that psychiatric diagnoses are meaningless, but they are swung as semantic blackjacks. Cracking the subject's respectability and dignity destroys him just as effectively, and often more so, as cracking his skull. The difference is the man who wields a blackjack is recognized by everyone as a public menace, but one who wields a psychiatric diagnosis is not. If you find yourself wielding psychiatric diagnoses and calling your friends bipolar and ADHD and clinically depressed and schizophrenic, j'accuse. You might want to look at yourself and realize that your mind is colonized as an oppressor and root it out and stop doing that to yourself and others. Here's a guy named Ronald Five, American psychiatrist, diagnosing Abraham Lincoln. What an insult. Mental illness is a myth. Remember that, Thomas Zatz. The function is to disguise and render more palatable the bitter pill of moral conflicts in human relationships. In other words, you got moral conflicts, you got ethical conflicts, you got social conflicts, you got challenges and difficulties. They're not disease. And R.D. Laing. Seems very strange to me we have this word paranoia, meaning we think someone's being persecuted and somebody else doesn't think he is being persecuted. So you're paranoid if you think someone's persecuting you and somebody else doesn't think they are. But what's the other way around? He says, this is a really good point. We haven't got a word for the condition in which you are persecuting someone without realizing it, which I would have thought is at least as serious. You're calling someone schizophrenia, they're saying they're not mentally ill, that you're just picking on them. Oh, they're paranoid schizophrenic. Have you considered that maybe you don't realize that you are persecuting that person with your benevolence? Here's an anonymous Soviet psychiatrist. Your disease is dissent. Tom Zatz, mental illness has no meaning beyond its consequences. Looking for the organic etiology of mental illness is like looking for the caloric content of food for thought. Mental illness is a metaphor. You can't look for an organic content, a biological or genetic basis of metaphor, any more than you look for calories in your food for thought. He's so good. Lastly, another psychiatric survivor, Diane Walker. Show me a schizophrenic and I'll show you a unicorn. I hope this supports you in just kind of challenging this mental process, where the language has insidiously infiltrated. Okay, and here's the last little set from Leonard. And these reflect some positive ways of seeing this dynamic. Let's start with Socrates, back even before Mr. Aristotle. There's a madness which is the divine gift. The greatest of blessings have come to us through madness. So 2,500 years ago, he's saying through this, that this thing we call madness is not necessarily a scourge, It can be a transformational process from which comes forward a blessing. That's what my book, The Necessity of Madness, is all about. Let me give you another one. George Bernard Shaw, that's a pretty famous playwright and philosopher. We want a few mad people. See where the sane ones have landed us? That's in the early 1900s. We want some mad people. Here's another one, Gregory Batesman, a brilliant philosopher, writer, theorist, linguist. Once precipitated into psychosis, the patient has a course to run. He is, as it were, embarked upon a voyage of discovery, which is only completed by his return to the normal world, to which he comes back with insights different from those of the inhabitants who never embarked on such a voyage. That's the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell talks about, right? You go into the dark side. All the mythologies talk about Pluto grabbing Persephone's, Jason going after the golden fleece. You name it, right? The hero's journey, the task of going into the depths, through the horrors, facing the dragons, coming forward, new and deeper understanding. T.S. Eliot, another famous literature person. You think I suffer from a morbid conscience, from brooding over faults I might have forgotten? You think I'm sickening when I'm just recovering? You see? The process of dying of illusions, the process of facing suffering, the process of seeing where you've been led astray and where you've been hurt, of being disillusioned of the falsehoods and the cruelties and the injustices, or just facing the places you've been hurt. It can be a healing and recovery process. Let's have some support. Abraham Joshua Heschel, Jewish philosopher. Madness is man's desperate attempt to reach transcendence, to rise beyond himself. Here's from the Cooper Lang group in England. Schizophrenic symptoms are virtually whatever makes the family unbearably anxious about the tentatively independent behavior of one of its offspring. David Cooper. The family gets unbearably anxious, and this person is called schizophrenic because they're doing that which triggers that deep fear and anxiety. On my website, wildestcults.com, I've got an article, To See or Not to See Schizophrenia. That would be a good one to check out. Got YouTube videos on this as well. And then his cohort, R.D. Laing. Without exception, the experience and behavior that gets labeled schizophrenic is a special strategy a person invents in order to live in an unlivable situation. There's always something that's been unlivable, horrifying, terrifying, distressing. That needs to be confronted to fully reemerge into a willingness and a desire to live with the rest of us. Thomas Zatz, in vain. Oh no, I'm sorry, I did that one. Another one from Lang. Madness need not be all breakdown, it may be breakthrough. That's the bottom line. People do experience severe and extreme distress, obviously, and not everybody makes it back. And there's many causes. But still, you get the idea. And it's important to allow and reclaim the possibility of seeing people and experiences for what they are, instead of through this preordained filter of anything that lays outside your ability to fully understand it, comprehend it, allow it without experiencing your own terror, becomes mental illness. And then you don't see anymore. You're not able to be with and allow that experience, and certainly not to be confident and have trust that it can unfold. Thank you.
If you liked this video, we have hundreds of more alternative videos ranging from sexual health to psychology to mind control. So if you liked it, go ahead and click on me to enter the Psychetruth channel.